Hi, I'm Cameron.
And I'm Hayden.
And this is
Until the End of Crime. Tell the listeners.
Okay, I'm moving to England.
Woo! Hell, Britannia.
And the day that this episode comes out, if you're listening in real time, I'm moving to England in 2 weeks from today.
Wild.
So from the date of this recording, 3 weeks. And I've known, in theory, I've known that I was moving to England since November.
Sure, in theory.
In actuality, I've known for 1 week. Mm-hmm. So, with that being said,
despite knowing it was coming, it's still a surprise to hear that it's happening.
Even for me.
Yeah. You know, seeing is believing, so...
Yes. So I've been in high gear trying to get things sorted stateside, but the plan is to still do the podcast.
100%.
You just might feel some of the rush that is going to have to inevitably happen to make sure that we are on schedule for production weekly still.
We would prefer to have no interruptions, but we really don't know what's to come or what things might look like. But you can trust that if something does change, or if we have to move to a different date, or something where we release 2 episodes in 1 week to satisfy not being able to release an episode 1 week, we'll let you know via our social media.
Yeah, so make sure you're following us on Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Really, Instagram.
That's where most of our...
That's where else would you be following us, if we're being honest at this point?
And we have a wonderful social media manager right now. Shout out to Sienna. And she is keeping that Instagram popping.
Yeah, when you see a post every day of the fucking week from Until the End of Crime, thank you, Sienna.
Thank you, Sienna. Okay, shall we get into this?
Let's dig in. Let's dip our toes into the world of crime. Let's loosen our gullet like the pelican so we can swipe up the trout of the criminal underworld.
Let's record this episode so that I can get back to packing and selling things.
If anyone is looking for, what are we selling?
Oh, I've got so many things to sell. Reach out. If you want something, especially some sort of electronic, reach out.
You want some fucking books.
I sold my books.
All of your books?
I sold the ones that I am willing to part with.
Oh, wow.
I took 9 huge bags to half-price books.
TVs.
Got a couple of those.
TVs. A Ninja Foodie Grill XL.
No, that's spoken for.
Oh, by who?
Marilyn and Josh.
Oh, that'll be good for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that dresser.
A Yonic mirror.
Why does it have to be Yonic? Are we recording? Are we doing this?
Honestly, I bet my mom would want that if you want to sell it. That's true. Okay, I'm sorry. Continue. Again, back to the pelican of crime. The pelican's gullet of crime. I'm ready to swallow it down.
Oh my God.
Unless it's a bad story, then I'm going to spit it out.
Okay. Well, I guess now that you're a pelican, it's important for me to ask, are you more of a journey person or a destination person?
I'm not a journey person. Journeys are work. Who is a fucking what? I understand life is a journey, right? I get it. I intellectually understand it. As a therapist, I probably spit some version of that out. But like most people, for myself, if I could avoid the journey, that's obviously ideal.
You're very destination focused.
Yeah.
In a strange turn of events, you answered my question very close to what I was expecting you to answer it. Yeah.
That was an easy answer. That was, of course, I'm not, if I had more appreciation for the journey, I would probably, and of course this is metaphorical, but
yeah.
If I had more appreciation for the journey, I would probably end up staying at my destination longer. But I don't appreciate the journey, right? My weight loss journey, I didn't appreciate it. I didn't take time to make mental note of how important it was, how difficult it was. I was too focused on the destination. And once I got there, I had a really hard time staying there. And I didn't. And so I almost didn't do my MSW program because I was like 2 years of time.
Does this in some way inform, in part, or I feel like it's got some sort of symbiotic relationship with the fact that you're not somebody who is a very patient person.
Right.
Yeah. They're connected.
Of course they are.
I think for me, I'm more of a journey person, but I also think that that's maybe, quote unquote, if there was a right answer, that's the quote right answer. So I don't know.
That's the admirable answer.
Sure.
I love the journey. The journey informs my humanity. It makes me who I am.
I don't love the journey, but I appreciate the journey. I appreciate the what causes it to get us from here to there. I think I'm probably both, but I have an appreciation for the journey in a way that I think maybe explains why I can be a very patient person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can appreciate other people's journeys.
Yeah.
Love that for them. But for me, I do get frustrated. Well, and I say that, but just yesterday, I had a session with a client, and of course, I can't say too much, but it went really, really well. Mm-hmm. And they were really appreciative of what I was able to help them with. And I called Andrew afterwards, and I was like, this shit has finally paid off. All of the work, all of the studying, getting the degree, working in hospice, doing extra material reading, continuing education, all of the practicing I did with diagnosis and treatment planning and using different interventions. And I finally got to see it come to fruition and what it was able to do for somebody. And that was incredible. And I told him, I said, it finally paid off. This is the payoff. This is what I've been waiting for. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's easier for me to say I don't appreciate the journey while I'm on it. But in some of my coursework, it feels like, oh my God, how am I going to use this? When am I going to use this?
Right.
What's the point? And then I get to a point where, okay, this did matter. This was helpful. And it makes me appreciate the journey then. But it's hard for me to appreciate the journey while I'm on it.
Yeah. I think that makes sense even when we're reflecting on like experience that we've had that brought us to where we're at today. Mm-hmm. Because I think that we've had conversations where there are parts of my journey that you would have, if you had your say, that I would have avoided, maybe.
Maybe.
And I appreciate them because I see how they got me to where I am today. And my life is kind of a journey anyway, because I move all the time. I've lived in a lot of different places in Texas.
You do be having journeys.
Yeah.
You do have journeys.
Yeah, and then once I get there, I'm like, well, now what? And then I kind of set off on my next journey. So maybe it is authentic that I say that I am a journey person. Don't stop believing.
Oh, yes. I love to be in disarray. I love to not have any idea where the fuck I'm going.
That's the journey.
That's okay. Okay, I'm ready for your story.
All right.
Well, no more journey. Let's get to the destination.
I'm going to start off by telling you about a couple of the players in today's case.
Okay.
I need to preface that this case as a whole is heavy on the crime,
okay,
but light on the information.
Okay.
So I did my best to gather as much information as I could about the situation as a whole, but I can guarantee two things. One, that I'm missing some parts.
Okay.
And two, that I actually brought you two cases today.
Perfect.
So they're both short. I think episodic. It'll still be shorter than an average episode with two cases, but consider this the disclaimer.
All right, I'm ready. I'm set.
So to start off, the case takes place in the census-designated location.
It's a fucking weird descriptor, but okay.
I think that that's why, because it's not an actual town,
Okay.
but we are in the census-designated location of Ranchos de Taos in New Mexico.
Okay. How many people live there?
What a wonderful question.
I mean, since it's census designated.
Yes. That's a really good question.
Do you have a really good answer?
I don't have an answer.
Okay. Off to a really strong start.
It's not relevant.
Oh, okay. Is that where the crime takes place?
Yes, the case takes place in the census-designated location of Ranchos de Taos.
Okay, Ranchos de Taos. Got it.
I do not understand the nature of the relationship between Desiree Linzegrave and Joseph Morgas.
I like both of those last names.
I'm not confident in saying that first last name.
Say it again.
Linzegrave?
Linzegrave.
Linzegrave? There's no E. It ends on a V.
Huh.
Linzegrave. Desiree. So, I don't know whether they were at some point in a romantic relationship, if they were neighbors, coworkers, friends, or friends of friends. I found one thread on Reddit that spoke about this case, and somebody casually mentioned, quote, the drug house. I couldn't figure out if they were quoting that from court records or not, but there was no further explanation about it. So I guess do what you will with that.
Okay.
I only included that because I wondered myself if the lack of information and coverage about this case was due to something like them knowing each other through an avenue that would make them less likely to be reported on heavily, such as substance use or sex work.
Right.
I'm not saying that there was substance use or sex work at all, but when I saw that the drug house on Reddit, one, it looked like they were trying to quote it from a court document, but two, it maybe informed some of the information about this case. What I do know is that at some point in his past, Joseph Morgas had a manslaughter conviction for a stabbing incident, and Desiree had allegedly been sexually assaulted at some point. I don't know if I don't know the nature of the relationship between these two at all. So I don't know if either one of them was involved in either of those situations.
But Desiree didn't have any criminal charges. She had been sexually assaulted.
Correct.
But Morgas.
Manslaughter. Yeah.
Okay. Did he serve any time?
I think so. Wow.
Do you know the reason he slaughtered a man?
Do I know the case? I don't know. I don't believe that I know the reason.
Okay.
But I also don't have any further information about the sexual assault, the perpetrator, when it happened, or the circumstances surrounding it.
I didn't want any of it, so it's okay.
Okay, good. I just know that allegedly, at some point by mid-2019, whatever the relationship between Desiree and Joseph was, it was contentious.
Okay.
It may have always been contentious. Again, I don't have a ton of information about it, but I read that Joseph had either an inciting incident or had continuously been giving Desiree a hard time by ridiculing her about her sexual assault.
What a disgusting jerk.
Yeah, that is disgusting. I read different reportings about it, so he may have been accusing her of lying about it, or maybe he was implying that she deserved it or that she had consented and it wasn't actually a sexual assault. Again, nothing is all that clear, but the fact of the matter is, he seems to have said things that were upsetting to Desiree. I also read that he had some recording of Desiree and that Joseph was threatening to release or to turn it into local law enforcement and was suggesting that by him doing that, Desiree would lose custody of her son as a result of the footage.
This guy's a creep.
Yeah, this dog is sawing logs.
Well, that is what she does.
Mm-hmm. It's not clear to me whether or not the footage was related to the sexual assault, but in sources I read that included both pieces of information, they seemed intertwined in some way. Possibly that they were just distressing for Desiree. This is all information that came to light long after, so there's no true record of it in real time, which would maybe explain why the details are all over the place. In September of 2019, a missing person was reported to the New Mexico State Police. 30-year-old Joseph Morgas had last been seen in August of the same year. Cut to August 13th, 2020.
Cut to...
Sam Star lip syncing. When police are called to the hospital where a woman had been admitted? Oh my gosh. All right, folks, we're gonna wrap this up.
Admitted. She was admitted.
A woman had been admitted for stab wounds to her neck. Her consciousness was fading, and in order to best provide life-saving care, she was put into a medically induced coma. And when she was able to safely regain consciousness, the police were there to arrest her on suspicion of murder.
Oh my God.
So 30-year-old Desiree Linzegrove was brought to the University of New Mexico Hospital after having been stabbed multiple times by her husband, Aram Montoya, who was 38 at the time. Police located a man in a field near the Rancho Stataus residence where Desiree had likely been stabbed, indicated by the blood found outside of the home. The man was Aram, and he was visibly upset and wearing a torn, blood-covered shirt. When investigators entered the home, they were able to locate the bloody knife used to stab Desiree, and Aram was booked on several assault counts and one count of attempted murder.
But why was she arrested?
The day following his arrest for the attack committed against his wife, Aram made a startling confession to investigators that took what seemed like it would be a straightforward intimate partner violence case to a whole new level that would lead them to closing the missing persons case that had originally been filed 11 months prior.
Okay.
Aram indicated to the investigators that he and his wife had murdered Joseph Morgas in August of 2019.
Doing a true crime podcast has made me callous.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, okay, are we going to congratulate them for their public service?
This would explain why people don't get back to us about doing cases, or back to me, rather.
Well, okay, hold on. I mean, just from what you've shared about Joseph Morgas, manslaughter, extortion?
Possibly, but all of that information is stuff that came out after his body had been found. So we're getting one side of the story.
Sure, you're right. I just, okay. It absolutely sucks. I never want anyone to be murdered.
Right.
Right.
We also don't get to choose our victims.
Correct.
Because any person who is a victim of murder
is a victim of murder.
Right.
Yeah. And so it's just, there are some times where it's hard to generate sympathy from within because you have not painted this as a likable, redeemable character person. I shouldn't even say character, right? That makes his life less significant, and that's not fair.
Right.
But this person, this identity that you have been able to piece together and share, it's I'm sorry, continue.
Yeah, and I did that on purpose because what I didn't like was when I was doing research, I only found in one source as like an afterthought in the final 2 sentences about this that he had been involved in a manslaughter conviction. It was just like this afterthought that was like, and he'd had his own run-in with the police in the past, having been charged with manslaughter for a stabbing incident.
Yeah. You know, no person should get to act as judge, jury, and executioner. So I do have sympathy. It's mostly that our justice system was violated and left unused in this instance because it is not Desiree or her husband's place to end someone else's life.
Right.
And as far as the court system believed, he had served his time for whatever he received some kind of punishment for manslaughter.
You know, I would really like to know more about a manslaughter stabbing, because stabbing is something that seems very intentional, but manslaughter can be something that was not intentional. So I've got questions about that.
He thought it was a butcher block. He didn't know any better. Which hole does this fit in?
All right. So according to Aram, his wife had solicited him to kill Joseph Morgas because they had had some tension between the two in the past, as I touched on already. And despite being treated at the hospital for life-threatening stab wounds, which are not light, for the record, light stab wounds are not typically life-threatening. So, despite Desiree being treated at the hospital for life-threatening stab wounds inflicted by Aram at the time of his confession to murder, he had followed through with murdering Joseph because he loved Desiree.
Okay.
When Desiree woke up from her coma in the hospital, as I mentioned, she was met with officers there with a warrant for her arrest because Aram had told them that his wife was less than happy with Joseph and that he was threatening to compromise her custody of her son. So to some extent, that information is what Desiree claims was the motive behind wanting to remove Joseph's alleged threats by killing him. Desiree does dispute that she wanted him killed. She claims that she only wanted him kidnapped and assaulted. For the record,
just kidnapped and assaulted.
I personally, it is my opinion that that is not true.
Well, while you're opining, I think it's such an interesting duality of, okay, I am in trouble. I've been arrested for, what is it called?
Assault?
Was she arrested for assault?
Oh, I thought you were talking about Adam. She was arrested for suspicion
soliciting a murder?
Yeah, suspicion of murder, soliciting a murder. I think there's a whole slew of, I mean, we're going to get into it, but like,
I just feel like my
treatment of a
defense wouldn't
corpse.
be I wanted him kidnapped and assaulted, but really probably tortured. But you know what? Death was just a happy accident. You're not...
It doesn't even matter because if you're committing a felony and somebody dies during the commission of the felony, it's the same as capital offense.
Did Desiree have legal representation?
Well, I mean, yeah, right now she's coming out of a coma and being arrested, so she's got gashes on her neck still.
There's a, it's... I don't think you've ever launched into a case like this where there's less foundational groundwork, so there is a lot of
unanswered questions.
Yeah, but please continue. I want to know.
I will, when we get to the end of this, I will explain maybe how I got to this case because, yeah, it's probably not a typical case that I would... Mm-hmm. I'll get into it. Don't worry. It does involve the murder of Heyman Lee and Adnan Syed's guilt or innocence. And so that's how we got here. But anyway, so Desiree's husband said that Desiree explicitly wanted Joseph killed. But overall, that was the only discrepancy between the two stories. And Aram had, in the meantime, taken the investigators to Joseph's body, where they found clothing and a vertebrae that would substantiate Aram's confession. As I mentioned before, Desiree had asked Aram to kill Joseph for or with her. And so how that played out is the couple kidnapped him from the yard of a friend's home and using a green rope, strangled him while they drove. I believe Desiree was the driver because she, according to Aram, had asked repeatedly if Joseph was dead yet. Which is why I don't think that she just wanted him to be assaulted. I do think that this weighed really heavily on Aram. I think that that's kind of how we got here. That's how 11 months later we ended up with this stabbing incident and then with his quick confession. Because I don't know that there was any leads on Desiree or Aram in this case. I don't think that anybody was really looking at them, so I think it was kind of a relief for him. Kind of like how they talk about when they finally catch somebody, you can usually tell that somebody's guilty because they sleep in the interrogation room because they're
no longer running.
Right, they've been waiting for this moment and running from this moment for so long that now they don't have to be so on edge anymore. That's kind of the vibe I got when I was looking into this.
I see it.
So once Joseph was dead, the couple drove the body out to Miranda Canyon, burned it, and then covered it with brushwood to form a disguised makeshift grave. So that's why I think that there were also charges about, what was done with the corpse.
Okay.
I feel like several charges probably about...
Was defiling a corpse?
Yeah, unlawful disposal of a corpse, abuse of a corpse.
Yeah.
So...
It's not like the corpse gives a shit.
Wow.
Well, they don't. They're dead.
I do tend to think that it's more about the family that is not.
You're right.
Yet
You're right. You're
corpses.
right. You're right. You're right. I know. You're right.
I think you're in a weird mood for crime today.
I am in a way weird mood today for crime, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
I've also been obsessed with Dexter.
Oh,
I've been watching the shit out of Dexter. And
I love Dexter.
Yeah, I feel like I'm like, okay, yeah, kill him. Kill him. Kill the criminals.
I see where you came in at the beginning pretty hot, like, shrug, he sounds like a bad guy.
Yeah, oh, you're abusing a corpse. Well, they're already dead.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. I wonder, what family survived him?
He had family.
Also, if you had no one that loved you, you were just totally in isolation. You're just you. No one to claim your body. And they find your body abused. And then they're able to identify you somehow, right? They're like, oh, this is so-and-so.
Yeah, I think in that situation, humanity cares.
Oh, okay. So it does default to someone caring.
Yeah.
They can just put that shit on you whether someone cares or not.
The law cares.
Yeah, we're apathetic. We don't care. Who cares? I care. Maybe I'm just feeling adversarial today in terms of I want to go against the norm. Okay, anyway, I'm sorry. Continue.
So
back to
the murder of Joseph Morgas.
Morgas.
Mm-hmm.
Morgas. Mm-hmm.
So Aram pleaded guilty to the murder of Joseph Morgas and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Okay.
He actually, from what I could tell, went before the judge for both.
That's how I know this is an American case. Fuck you. No parole.
Okay, he went before the judge for both the murder of Joseph Morgas and the attempted murder of his wife at the same time. And he pleaded guilty to the charges.
We also know American justice doesn't care about attempted murder.
I think they do if you've already actually committed murder.
That's fair. But what did they do to the nameless guy who Mary Vincent?
The monster.
Uh-huh. He got 7 years for that, right?
Yes, for her. But that was at the time in California. That was the max.
Okay.
That was the biggest sentence that they could. You know what? I don't really want to get into it again, but I think that the intention is the same, whether you're good at it or not.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm saying.
Like, I don't know why the legal system feels like it needs to differentiate, because if you're talking mens rea, the mens rea is the same.
Can you explain to the listeners what mens rea is? I know what mens rea is, but they might not.
I know you know, because I learned about it on How to Get Away with Murder, which we used to watch weekly together.
Yeah, so I know what it is. I just think the listeners might need to know.
Yeah, it's the mental state in which you are committing the act.
Now we're all on the same page.
Yes. Now everybody is caught up with both me and Hayden. So he went before the judge for both the murder and attempted murder, pleading guilty to the charges that remained after the district attorney made a plea deal with him that removed some of the other charges between the two criminal events. Desiree, it seems, opted to plead not guilty and took her chances at trial. Did that pay off? Only time will tell. Assistant District Attorney Cosme Ripoll. Honestly, the names in this case, I almost scrapped the whole thing.
What is her name?
His name.
Oh, what is his name?
Cosme Ripoll. Ripol.
Okay.
Prosecuted Desiree Linzegraf for the kidnapping, murder, and other charges, which I have to assume include tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, unlawful disposal of a corpse, and things of that nature with regard to Joseph Morgas. After a 2-hour jury deliberation, Desiree was convicted of murder and sentenced to 45 years in prison.
Yeah. Okay, Desiree.
Then she appealed.
Okay.
Or her legal team appealed, claiming that Desiree had not been given a fair trial because ADA Ripoll had made hyperbolic and inflammatory claims against Desiree.
Ripoll.
That was described as, quote, a 3-day-long exercise in pathos and character assassination that deprived Linzegraf of a fair trial, unquote.
Hard to fault a guy using Aristotelian appeals.
Ripoll's case against Desiree was pretty simple for the jury to follow. He alleged that Desiree was a bruja, or witch, that used her menstrual blood to control her husband.
Shut the fuck up. No, he did not.
He sure did.
No.
He sure did. My guess is that
She used her menstrual blood
that is what Repo said.
to control her husband. How did he ingest it?
I don't know that
Did
he
she
got into...
just bathe him in her menstrual blood?
Look, Repo not practicing witchcraft.
He didn't say this.
He
is
did
made
say
up.
this. No, he did say this.
Cameron, a fucking lawyer, a prosecutor, got up and said this bruja did brujeria on her husband and through her menses controlled him and took over his body and will.
I mean, I feel like you've taken some creative liberties with this, but he absolutely said in the trial, in front of her defense team, in front of a judge, in front of the jury, that she was a witch who controlled her husband with witchcraft.
Could you imagine? Okay, you're in the jury box.
I can't imagine any
you
of
hear
this.
that shit. I would be laughing. I would be laughing in the jury. I would get in trouble. I knew I would get in trouble because that shit's funny. That's so unreal.
You probably wouldn't have made it through his jury selection process.
You know what? 1,000% I wouldn't have. You're right. I'm never going to get picked for a jury.
Because you know his screening questions, they would have filtered you out.
Do you believe in witchcraft? Do you believe in brujeria?
And you would laugh, and then it would be like...
Oh, you're serious?
X.
You know, this has already thrown me. This has thrown me. This was his argument in court. It's hard to believe. Okay, continue. Go. Whatever.
Her husband, by the way, had been removed from the prosecution's witness list and was never able to be questioned about any of the claims that Ripo was making with regard to their relationship.
Well, yeah, because his wife still had control over him.
And despite the fact that Ripo himself had already removed Aram from the witness list, he told the jury in his opening statement that they would hear from Aram.
Okay.
He did, however, call other witnesses and questioned them in a way that would lead to them affirming his claims of Desiree performing witchcraft. This included a witness who alleged that at, quote, the drug house, unquote, she became upset and they saw her pupils dilate. Her eyes turned black, and then the wind began to blow.
Oh, are we living in the fucking craft?
We must be. To be very clear, I never saw anything about Desiree practicing witchcraft in any way aside from in the prosecution's case.
Also, if she practiced witchcraft, couldn't she just make Morgas stop being a weirdo?
I don't actually want to go down the slippery slope of what would have happened differently if she did practice witchcraft.
I mean, there was a much simpler and direct solution.
Yeah. You would think that this case was taking place in Salem in the 1600s.
This is the weirdest thing this is so weird.
And not in a courtroom in, 2021?
Yeah. And these United States.
With all these apathetic Americans.
Okay. Sure.
I don't know if Ripo, who was trying his first case as the lead prosecutor, decided that Desiree being a witch just sounded good and would make his case easier for a jury to find her guilty because of the magical skills he claimed she possessed. I don't know how we got here, in all honesty, but part of the prosecution team's case involved Ripo having evidence be brought into court that had been found both at the unceremonial burial site that Aram and Desiree had made for Joseph and pulled from a river where several evidence pieces were found. And the evidence, which he insisted needed to be brought in physically, had such an awful, pungent smell that it had to be removed from the courtroom, with the jury being told by him to get a good look at it as it was taken out because they wouldn't get another chance to look at it. And court had to be called to recess for the remainder of the day, with the trial resuming the following day because the stench of the evidence that Ripo had insisted be brought in physically was so severe that it shut the courtroom down.
Where the fuck is the judge? Where is the judge? Where is the judge that is supposed to practice a level of judicial control and say this shit is otherworldly?
You know, You're not the first person to ask that. You're not the first person to wonder what was going on between the judge and the defense team.
Like, did no one ever call an objection? Was there no? What fucking relevance does this have?
We are going to talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
But no, there were not objections, or at the very least, not enough objections were being called.
This is insane.
I know. In his closing argument, Ripoll reminded the jury of the horrendous smell that the evidence carried and said, quote, "We didn't just see and hear about death. We smelled it. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the state demands, asks, requires that you go back and deliberate and find Desiree guilty for the stench of death that permeated this courtroom," unquote.
I do love the dramatic flair.
You know what? He's definitely got that going for him. So when the appeal made it to the New Mexico Supreme Court, the justices were not only appalled by ADA Ripoll's claims and behavior in court, but equally so by the judges and the defense's lack of objection, allowing Ripoll's offensive behavior and actions to go unchecked throughout the proceeding. Honestly, though, if you're defense, aren't you just sitting there saying, go off, we're going to get this overturned on appeal?
Yeah.
I mean, they wrote, the Supreme Court justices, quote, "At every stage of trial, from opening statement through rebuttal argument, the prosecution grounded its case in inadmissible evidence. ADA Ripoll used opening statements to expose the jury to incriminating allegations from a non-testifying co-defendant, repeatedly accused defendant of witchcraft, unnecessarily displayed foul-smelling physical evidence that had been attached to the remains of a burnt and buried body, and told the jury that the state, quote, demands and requires the jury to convict defendant, quote, for the stench of death that permeated this courtroom. The entire trial was filled with theatrics, hyperbole, and disparaging inflammatory statements, such that the extent of the misconduct cannot be fully conveyed in this opinion." The New Mexico Supreme Court determined that, in fact, Desiree had not been given a fair trial, a direct violation of her constitutional rights. And
what do those matter?
Well,
what does due process matter?
All I know is that her convictions were then vacated.
Okay.
They also indicated that double jeopardy bars the state of New Mexico from seeking charges against Desiree Linzegrove again for the murder of Joseph Morgas.
DA Ripoll fucked up.
Yeah. So in this case, the journey cost the justice system its destination. Because Ripoll's eagerness to win the case rather than to afford Desiree her constitutional rights to a fair trial, it came at the price of justice for Joseph Morgas. Prosecutorial misconduct is a large contributing factor in wrongful conviction cases, and obviously, convictions of truly guilty parties can be thrown out as a result of it, all of which leave guilty parties free to get away with literal murder in some cases. 30% of exonerations are due to prosecutorial misconduct, approximately.
Wow.
And because the murder of Joseph Morgas did not come with a lot of information, because the bulk of it was about how the person who, according to her husband, masterminded the murder went free, I'm going to tell you another case where the ACLU stepped in because they felt the defendant's constitutional rights were violated. We're going to shift to Killeen, Texas, in November 2004. Do you want to talk about that case before we move on?
About which case?
The case where Joseph Morgas...
I think we talked about it pretty substantially while we were going through it.
Okay.
I think the judicial oversight that did not seemingly exist, I think maybe could have helped prevent this conviction being vacated, right? I think it sounds like she really did play a role in this incident. Not that I don't think she suffered enough by being stabbed in the fucking neck, but...
I personally don't think it's fair to say that somebody who was injured in an unrelated incident, maybe it was related because her husband was probably going through it.
Yeah.
But then you're saying, okay, well, this person committed murder and then they were in an accident that paralyzed them, so they've suffered enough. I don't think that that's a direct.
I thought you were telling me that her and her husband were in a disagreement about Morgas's death, or that he was upset with her because of that, or because of his guilt.
I think maybe he was spiraling because of the guilt, but I don't know. Like, I don't know what actually led up to him stabbing her. They could have been fighting about the murder. They could have been fighting about something else. Maybe she came to him again and was like, hey, this person cut me off. Like, we got to go take care of that.
I mean, sure, I don't believe in get out of jail free cards. I don't think your circumstances absolve you of punitive and rehabilitative actions. I do think that if those things are all related, and we're talking about a situation where there are so many extenuating facts and information to this case that I wish I knew, so I could give a more nuanced opinion about how I think things unfolded. But I think that if the prosecution makes an argument like they did, it should be vacated. She should not be allowed to be tried again. That's...
You know, I understand the defense just letting it happen, because I think you see very easily that this will be something you can appeal. I've got a lot of questions surrounding the judge.
Yeah, me too. Samesies.
So, but there's not a lot of information on that at all. And again, we've talked about it before, how the media chooses the victims that it wants to highlight and bring attention to. And so now we've got the situation where there's not a lot of information about this person who was kidnapped and then killed in a pretty brutal fashion, and then disposed of in an even more horrific fashion. And as much as I want to tell you about his story, all I was able to find is that he had a manslaughter charge at some point.
All right. Back to Killeen.
Back to Killeen, November 2004, when 25-year-old Richard Tabler worked at a nightclub managed by 28-year-old Muhammad Amine Ramouni. No follow-up questions on the pronunciation. I'm doing my best. Until the two men had some sort of conflict that left Richard without the job. Muhammad allegedly threatened Richard at some point during or shortly after the conflict by saying that he would pay $10 to have Richard's entire family wiped out.
Oh my God.
I have to imagine that you take issue with the idea that he could do this for $10 based on your insistence that $5,000 was low.
Yeah. I mean, it is 2004. The cost of living wasn't nearly as exorbitant. But $10, I don't think
for
that'll do it.
For a whole family.
Yeah. My God.
Yeah.
Is that like...
I think that the $10 makes the threat seem less credible. And it's intended to be insulting.
Right.
So...
You're such a piece of shit that having you and your family wiped out would be $10 worth.
Yeah. Ugh. Anyway... The confrontation between the two ended with Richard being banned from the nightclub. So again, we've got two people who have some unpleasant exchange. And so Richard decides on November 18th that the best way to deal with this is to formulate a plan to kill Muhammad.
Seems reasonable. Reasonable reaction.
Yeah. So in the 8 days following the 18th, after he has made this decision, Richard purchased a camcorder, a truck, and a handgun, and makes contact with Muhammad.
Camcorder is wild. I mean, truck is wild, but he's filming this?
And this is how you know that this is being recorded in America, because the gun, not wild.
The gun, soup norm. I'm surprised he didn't find it for free on the street in 2004.
So... On November 26th, which happened to also be Thanksgiving in 2004, and regardless of the year, is always my sister's birthday, Richard makes arrangements to meet up with Muhammad because he tells him that he has things like a sound system to sell to him for $1,500. Again, I think that this lends credibility. The fact that Muhammad was willing to meet up with him lends credibility to my personal opinion and theory that this exchange was not as serious to Muhammad as it was to Richard.
Sure.
So Richard has 18-year-old Timothy Payne with him, and 25-year-old Haytham Frank Zayed drives his friend Muhammad to the parking lot where Richard and Muhammad have agreed to meet. Timothy records some of the events that followed immediately after Haytham and Muhammad arrived. First, Richard shot Haytham while he was in the driver's seat, and he died quickly, if not immediately. Richard then shot Muhammad, and after shooting both men, he pulled them out of the vehicle they had been in and realizes that Muhammad was not dead, and so he delivered a kill shot to Muhammad, which is the part that Timothy recorded.
This is all feeling a little extreme.
Yeah, don't you think?
I mean, just a little overreactive.
I think that we're also dealing with somebody who was in a... The ACLU does mention this at some point later, but I don't know that we're dealing with somebody whose mental capacity is regulated, if you will. So Richard then stole some items from the car, and then he and Timothy left the scene. Timothy remained in possession of the recording and showed it to a friend.
Oh, good.
But then destroyed it. After killing the two men, Richard, not identifying himself, called the local police department and took credit for the murders, but also told them he would be committing a second double homicide.
Oh my God.
Unless the nightclub was shut down. And 2 days after killing Muhammad and Haytham, Richard enticed two of the dancers from the club. So I want to say right now that some sources said it was a nightclub and some said strip club. I'm just saying nightclub because it kind of encompasses whatever the potential type of club it was.
I mean, any club can have strippers or go-go's.
Sure.
But not every strip club is also a club.
Right.
I say that like I've been to lots of clubs and strip clubs.
All right, click-clack over there.
Click-clack, the sound of a slingback.
And the sound of your glasses. So I'm just saying nightclub, but maybe strip club. I don't really know.
Whatever it was.
Right. But the two dancers were promised drugs. And so 18-year-old Tiffany Dotson and 16-year-old Amanda Benfield go with Richard to the lake where he pulled the 9mm that he had on them and shot them both several times.
18 and 16? Okay. That's terrible.
I know. After their bodies were found, Tiffany was identified quickly, but it took almost a week to determine that Amanda was actually a runaway from Louisiana before they could identify her. So I don't know if she had a fake ID or how strict this nightclub was about checking the age of their dancers.
Right.
But anyway. Again, Richard called the police and claimed credit for the murders. He really wanted the police to shut down the nightclub, and he had a hit list of 11 people from the club that he was going to kill. As I mentioned in these calls, he was not identifying himself by name, but the police were already suspecting that Richard was the responsible party, which is why later the same day that he killed Tiffany and Amanda, he was arrested on separate felony charges. And on the 29th of November, he confessed to the 4 murders.
Easy.
He later retracted that confession and claimed he had nothing to do with the homicides.
That makes it a little less easy.
He and Timothy were both charged with capital murder for the murders of Muhammad and Haytham, and Richard was charged with capital murder for Tiffany and Amanda's deaths.
I hate the name Timothy.
Okay.
Okay. It's such a stupid name. Timothy.
Okay. After the prosecution confirmed that they would be seeking the death penalty for Richard, his defense team filed a motion to have the death penalty removed due to diminished responsibility. But the judge denied the motion, and in March 2007, Richard was found guilty and sentenced to death for each of the counts of murder that took place on Thanksgiving Day.
This feels fair.
He was never actually tried for the murders of Tiffany and Amanda, with that case against him still considered pending. Timothy was sentenced to life in prison later that same year.
I thought he was just sentenced to death.
Richard was.
Oh, okay.
In the years following Richard's conviction, he expressed remorse for what he had done. He wanted his appeals to be canceled, and twice he attempted to end his life in order to not waste the court system's time anymore than he felt he had already. Mm-hmm. The first attempt he made was in October 2008, which was the same month and year that he had been found in possession of a cell phone that he had used to make threats against then State Senator John Whitmire and now Mayor of Houston, claiming to know his daughter's names and his residential address. But he was as wishy-washy with his desire to have his appeals waived as he was when he gave the confession and then took it back, because he sometimes would take back his appeals to drop his appeals.
This dude. I mean, other than being a cold-blooded murderer.
I don't think the judge made the right call in denying the motion to have him at least assessed for diminished responsibility.
Yeah.
So, Richard was set to be executed in February 2010. But this was stayed after allegations came out that prison employees were threatening him to not go through with the appeals process in order to expedite the execution. Which, if that's true, it seems to have had the opposite effect. Mm-hmm. A trial was held to determine his mental competence in 2011 after yet another attempt to have his appeals waived and to just be killed. His lawyers did not believe him to be mentally competent, and neither did the court at that hearing, from what I could tell. Mm-hmm. An appeal was filed and either turned down or dismissed in December 2009, August 2011, October 2014, June 2021, October 2023, and October 2024. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, who, from what I could gather, got involved with Richard's case in early 2024, which they did for a couple reasons. Because one, according to their website, Richard, quote, suffers from severe mental impairments. Mm-hmm. And two, ineffective assistance of counsel, a constitutional right, because at one of the hearings where Richard was claiming he wanted to drop his appeal, his attorneys refused to participate in the trial, effectively leaving him without any counsel working on his behalf.
What the heck?
Yeah. But as I already mentioned, his late 2024 appeal was also dismissed. So on February 13th, 2025, the state of Texas executed Richard Tabler by lethal injection. The families of some of the victims were present to hear Richard proclaim how sorry he was for having taken their loved ones from them. He said he would trade places with them or go back in time and just walk away from the situation if he could. Mm-hmm. His mother, sister, and wife were also, from what I could tell, present. He had told them he didn't want them to be there, but they insisted on being the last faces that he saw. When asked about Richard's final statements, Tiffany's father said it had taken him 20 years to get to this point, and that he needed to process what he had witnessed before he could truly process what Richard had used his final breaths to say. Right. And that's the case of spree killer Richard Tabler, who maybe arguably did not have all of his civil liberties granted throughout his appeals process. So, in that case, the destination was clearly more important than the journey.
Mm-hmm. Love the thematic nature of the stories.
Thanks. Mm-hmm. I wanted to cover a case that included prosecutorial misconduct because, not to get too true crime podcasty here, mm-hmm. but, Serial kind of set the genre off.
Right.
And that case has been covered a lot. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, they've got Undisclosed, which I think just the first season covers that whole case. And then you've got people who have spent years of their lives actually investigating the case, like Bob Ruff with his Truth and Justice podcast. And then you have the podcast, The Prosecutors, that covered the case in a 14-part series. And I listened to it. And I've been hesitant to listen to it because I don't even know if I can put into words why. But I finally was like, no, I'm going to go ahead and dive in. And I became so frustrated when I was listening to it because is the case good? Does it sound good at face value? Absolutely. But that's their job, is to take information that somebody else gathers and to put it together in a way that is delivered with confidence and that is delivered by claiming in absolute certainty that this person is guilty. But I was like, listening to it, I felt, one, like this is very prosecutor to present the case this way. And then two, they were giving Adnan, who was 17 at the time of this crime, so much credit as a criminal mastermind.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, but when you've spent time with 17-year-olds, you're just giving him so much credit. It was so difficult to listen to for me because I was like, you're just giving him so much credit. And I was like, the way that they're handling this is how we get to situations where prosecutorial misconduct, where attorneys are not behaving the way that they're supposed to by the law, is how we get to cases where people are either wrongfully convicted or people who should be convicted, the convictions get thrown out. And so I was researching cases with prosecutorial misconduct. And there really aren't a lot that would necessarily make for a super interesting case to cover. So this one where this guy goes missing and this woman who, in my opinion, should be serving time for this case, gets to walk free because the prosecutor didn't handle the case in the way that they should have handled it. But then it also was crazy to me to see that these attorneys, these defense attorneys, and again, I think that this speaks to Richard's mental capacity, that they probably became so resigned by his behavior and how he was back and forth. And then who knows what having a conversation with him was like. That they would just sit down and say, we can't do anything because he's not really letting us, when that it doesn't matter. That's still your job. You're still supposed to represent him. So to have it phrased, at least by the ACLU, that they sat down and didn't participate in the trial, I was like, what is going on with these attorneys? What are we doing? Did Richard commit these murders? Sure. He acknowledged that. Does that justify not giving him every constitutional right that he has to give him the best defense that you can? I don't think so. And again, I've got some questions for some of the judges in this situation because I think that he should have been truly assessed for his mental capacity to determine whether or not he could mentally be held responsible for what he did. So yeah, that's kind of how I got here with the theme, because to me that's really the big thing for prosecutors in particular. Is it about the journey or the destination? Because you're never going to get where you're going if you take the wrong exit or if you don't ever put gas in your vehicle. If you're doing it the wrong way, you're never going to get there. So anyway. Lawyers behaving badly is what we should call this episode.
I liked both of these stories. I think, personally, story one was a little more attention-grabbing for me.
Richard's story was very straightforward.
It is. It's very straightforward.
They argued, he got mad, he developed this scheme to murder, created a hit list, got the equipment, did the murdering.
4 people.
Right. Taunted the police in the meantime.
But like you said, due process is the law. It should be fully extended to all people. I don't know. That's kind of a complicated... I have more than one mind about how that situation unfolded. And I don't think I have the bandwidth to hold opposing ideas right now.
No, that's fine. That's fair.
Great job.
Thanks. Listeners, this episode did talk about self-harm So make sure that you are taking care of yourself. And if you find yourself in a mental crisis, you can always call 988. Somebody will be there to help you work through that. A complete list of sources and any links can be found in the show notes.
And that's all we've got for you today. Like and subscribe.
If you enjoyed listening
and want to hear more,
please subscribe.
Please subscribe 5 times.
Give us a 5-star rating and leave a review.
Give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. A good one, a positive one, an overwhelmingly persuasive and praiseful.
On Apple Podcast, even if that's not where you listen.
Yeah, that part
is helpful. Recommend us to a friend.
And follow us on Instagram at Until the End of Crime Pod. At Until the End of Crime.
How do you not know this? It's End of Crime Pod.
At gmail.com.
At End of Crime Pod on Instagram.
That's what I said.
You said at gmail.com.
But before that.
You said at Until the End of Crime.
Pod.
It's End of Crime Pod.
Oh, follow us at End of Crime Pod on Instagram. Wow, I decided to not pull up my template today and I am fucked.
I was literally about to say, what is happening here, dear listeners, is that Hayden did not pull up his template before I started this outro.
I just decided to do it. Cameron's like, how do you not remember? It's so easy. But I don't remember.
I don't know if I would be able to do it. I mean, I would be able to say a complete list of sources and any links can be found in the show notes.
Yeah.
Anyway, our email address is endofcrimepod@gmail.com, so feel free to reach out with questions or episode suggestions.
Yeah, I love those. I do.
And then Hayden would like to next take this opportunity to thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Until the next crime.